Welcome to the Refurbishment Mastery podcast with me, Martin Rapley. If you're a property investor who is worried about paying too much for your next property, concerned that you don't know how to manage a refurb, or scared that you will be ripped off by a builder, then this is for you. In this podcast, I share over 30 years of experience of managing refurbishments and conversions to help you make more profit, save your time, and ultimately enjoy the process. On with the podcast. So in this episode, I'm going to talk to you about JCT contracts. It's actually a subject that has come up quite a bit recently, perhaps more recently than it has done for a long time. So I thought I would use this opportunity to go into them in some more depth for you. So JCT contracts. JCT stands for Joint Contracts Tribunal. I'll come to that in a little bit, and we tend to come across them when we're working on larger projects, when we're working on more complex projects, and in my experience, they're always going to be required if you are using commercial finance for your project. So if you think your project ticks those boxes, then listen up, because JCT contract may well be something significant for you. So way back in the 1950s, I think it was, a number of construction bodies came together to create this thing called the Joint Contracts Tribunal. There were people there from the RICS and from RIBA and from engineering practices. There were legal people in there as well, and probably a number of other people as well. And the idea was in those days that they wanted to put together a standard building contract that could be compiled and put together by consultants, rather than the need to go to a solicitor every time we want to appoint a builder. We don't want to spend a lot of money going to a solicitor, and a solicitor starting a contract from a blank sheet of paper all of the time. They wanted to have something that was standardized and, as I say, could easily be put together by the consultants that were probably already employed and working on the project so far. So those consultants back in the early days were definitely the architect. Architects would put these contract documents together, and quantity surveyors would also put a lot of them together as well. More recently, I have to say, less architects seem to put them together now, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Architects, let's leave them creating some great space and coming up with some brilliant projects, rather than forcing them to go through some technical elements of a contract. So it doesn't surprise me that a lot of architects don't like doing contracts any longer. Quantity surveyors will definitely still do them for you, as will project managers. So the people that kind of manage your whole project for you. And it's actually something I do. I've been putting together JCT contracts in one way or another now for well over 30 years. In my early career, I was putting them together between me, my employer, the building contractor, and actually subcontractors. And I was also getting involved with them between us as the builder and our client. I wasn't signing them in those days because I wasn't a director, but I was certainly ensuring that they got put together properly. Nowadays, I'm mostly working with property investors, as you know. I probably do 6 or 7 JCT contracts a year, so not lots of them. But certainly still in there, still doing them, and they do come round, every few months or so, depending on what people are doing. And the thing about them is that once you've understood how they work, and you understand, particularly now it's all online and electronic, how to complete them, they're not a difficult thing to do. That's not to say they're done in 5 minutes. They're definitely not. I'll come to timeframes later on. But they're not a difficult thing to do. So the thing about these contracts that's really significant is that you need to know that whilst there's only two parties in the contract, there's actually three people needed to make this work. So the two parties to the contract, the two parties that are ultimately going to sign the contract and have an agreement are you, you're called the employer, and then there is your builder, who is called the contractor. So those are the two parties that actually end up signing the contract, and the agreement is between those two parties. But under the JCT setup and under the contract, there is a requirement for a third person to get involved. And that third person is called the contract administrator. Now, as I said, the contract administrator is a term for the person who puts together the contract and ensures that it is actually administered correctly, it is followed correctly. And those could be any of those consultants I mentioned, the architect, quantity surveyor, project manager. Those are the people. So they kind of wear two hats: quantity surveyor and contract administrator, project manager and contract administrator. And certainly this role, if you engage a project manager to do it, if you've got a project manager already managing your scheme, the extra over for them to act as contract administrator is actually not a great deal. A quantity surveyor, if they're already involved with a scheme, the extra over is not a great deal. If you bring in someone in from scratch, there's a little bit more kind of time needed to get up to speed, and a little bit more understanding needed. So, if you've got anyone already on board, they are definitely the people to be speaking to, or the person to be speaking to see if they will act as your contract administrator. So there's a contract between you and the contractor, the employer and the contractor. Then there's the contract administrator who actually puts the contract together, and they are named within the document as being the contract administrator. And significantly, one of the first jobs that the contract administrator has is to actually help you understand the contract and help you, work with you to select the correct contract. Because since those early days of 1950s, when they put together this standard contract, what's happened is the whole JCT suite of contracts have come about. And now there are stacks, I don't even know how many, there are stacks of different contracts for different types of projects, some of which you will never ever work on. In fact, some of which even people well established within construction will never ever work on. Because I've had a little bit of a quirky history, and my employment has done some specialist things, I've actually worked on a lot of the different contracts. Someone told me once there were over 50. I don't know if that's true. I'm certainly not where up near there, but I have worked on a lot of different ones, and I do, I do know the different reasons for using different contracts. Principally within property investing, I would say now I only ever recommend one of two different contracts. And there's reasons for both of them, principally based on size and complexity of the project. There's small works and reasonably simple projects, and then there's larger, more complex. There's larger than larger with more complex out in the construction world for multi-million pound projects. But most of the time, where I'm working with property investors, we're talking about projects up to 500,000-600,000, maybe up to 1 million occasionally. But most of the time, we're talking about fairly small things. So that's the first role of the contract administrator, is to help you understand why they've selected that contract and help you understand the elements of that contract so that you know what you're committing to, and how it works between you and the builder. And then the next thing that they'll do is actually talk to you about the terms and the conditions that need to go into the contract. Because although this is a pre-written contract that gives us instructions how we are going to follow this project through, there still needs to be some information input into that because there's things that can be varied on a project to project basis. Yeah, and there's obviously some simple things like clarifications of names, addresses, telephone numbers, contract sums, start date, end dates, insurances, payment terms, things like that. There's some obvious things, but there's also some other elements that are a little bit less obvious, not overly complicated, but some things that you may not actually know the answer to unless it was explained to you by someone who does, and that's your contract administrator's role. Now, the contract administrator, in some cases, has also got to have a conversation with the builder to, first of all, help them understand, because there's a lot of builders at the smaller end of the market who actually have never worked on JCT contracts. And a lot of them I find are actually scared of JCT contracts. And it's my job as contract administrator to help them understand how the contract works, and importantly, reassure them that it is a safe document to operate under, and it's been around for whatever it is, 70 odd years now, and therefore can be trusted. Significantly, it stands up in court. There's case study that directs how it's operated. So it is safe in that respect. And actually, I have to say, I think the JCT, whilst it's meant to be a fair contract for both parties, I have to say, I think it is weighted slightly in the favour of the builder. So, and I would explain that to contractors and to employers so that they're aware where that weighting is, and that weighting is slightly in favour of the building, in my opinion, because if you as the employer do not pay the builder, they can immediately remove their resources from site, and that's it. They're not doing any more work. And so it's not going to be a problem if you pay your builder, but if you don't, they can do that instantly of a drop of a hat. Not quite a drop of a hat. There's a little process, but it gives them a little bit more control. The contract administrator's role then rolls on to a point where we've got all of the contract completed. Both parties understand what the terms are. They understand how it's gone together. So the next thing the contract administrator will do is put together a draft document for checking. And so because we want to make sure that we're not issuing a document that's got an error in it of some type. Now, fortunately, now we compile all of these documents online. So there is an online portal called JCT Online, I think it is, and I'm a subscriber to that, so that I can buy electronic contracts. Back in the day, we had to buy two contracts and complete them both identically, and then we would get them signed up. And at the end of that, the employer would keep one and the contractor would keep one. Nowadays, we can do the whole lot electronically, and obviously, everyone has electronic copies nowadays. So the contract is compiled online. I fill out a questionnaire online and answer the questions and fill in the gaps. And then I create a draft version as a PDF, and it comes down to me, and it's got draft written across the whole lot so that we know that it's the draft. And I can double check that it's been completed properly. The employer can check that it's been completed properly. The contractor can see that they're happy with it all as well. And we've got everyone in the same place. Because if there's something wrong, it's still only in draft. We can go back. I can go back onto the online platform. I can tweak things. And that's not uncommon. I commonly find that there's something in there where the two parties hadn't actually agreed it. The employer thought they'd agreed something. They've told me that information, but when it goes to the builder says, "Hold on, we hadn't agreed that. Can we just talk it through?" And sometimes there's some changes from there. So we create this draft to make sure that we know where we are. So then once we're all happy and we've got everything, everything correct, T's crossed, I's dotted, we then the contract administrator then creates the final document. And all that does is just create another PDF document. But it's in a point now where the online portal is kind of closed, so you can't re-edit it. If there's an error at this point, you can only start again by buying a new contract online. Those contracts, the smaller ones are just under £100. The larger ones, I think, are about 150, something like that, plus VAT. Though there's a cost to getting hold of these, so we don't want to get them wrong. So, but we press the button and we get a new contract. We've now got a completed contract. It's got no signatures in it. It's not been signed at this point. What I then do is I add into that document. So I make a bigger PDF document by adding in some more documents, which are all of the drawings that are relevant for the project, any other details that are relevant for the project, the contractor's quotation, maybe the contractor's program, anything else that is relevant for the point in time where that contract is in place. And then I'll make that one big PDF document. And then I send it to both parties for signing and witnessing. I use one of the online portals. I use Signable, but obviously other ones are available. So choose the one that works. You'll see others used by other people. It traditionally goes to the builder first, so the builder signs, and then they get a witness and the witness's witness's address, and then it goes on to the employer. They sign with a witness and the witness's address, and then I always ensure it comes back to me. I check that everything is correct for one last time, and then I actually insert a date at that point, which is the point at which effectively the whole thing is complete and in place from. So that is the basic process. Now, how long can this take? Well, in reality, if we had all of the information and we sat and did it in one go, we could probably just about do it in a day, depending on the complexities of the contract. There's a good number of hours needed to put the contract together in the first place. The larger one takes longer than the smaller one, of course, but there's a good amount of time needed there. But if all that information was right, we could in reality do it in a day. Have I ever done that? No. Have we ever got to a point where all of the information is available and in place? I don't think we ever have. I think we're always waiting for something. Invariably, we're waiting for things from the builder, or we're waiting for the builder to actually follow things through. A lot of the time, the builders are only looking at their things in the evening. A lot of the time, it's the builder's paperwork that's not in order, and I have to chase that. Invariably, it's their insurances or something like that that's not quite right. So I tend to say to most of my clients, we really need to be starting this process 2 weeks before the work starts on site. Normally, I would aim to be able to turn it around in a week, but it can take a little bit longer. And as I say, the delay, well, the time is putting the document together in the first place. The delay is often getting all of the paperwork and information from your builders. So the key thing to know about these contracts is you should not be trying to compile these yourselves. So I get property investors asking me for templates and if they can see what it looks like. I haven't got any templates. I buy a contract and complete it. So I've got lots of completed contracts, but of course I can't go sharing those. There's GDPR things to consider in there. But in reality, none of you as property investors or small developers should really be putting these documents together for yourself. So as a result, you don't really need to see a copy of them blank. You need to be finding a contract administrator that can help you put these documents together. And ultimately, if you do try and act as your own contract administrator, then actually we've got a conflict of interest in there. And if there were a problem down the line, the contract would be considered void and be thrown out, in which case, effectively it would be a waste of time. It'd be ignored. The whole idea with contracts is the very nature of agreeing the terms and conditions up front, putting the whole lot into a document and asking both parties to sign to say that they're happy with that. That very process on its own massively reduces the amount of conflict and uncertainty you might have further down the line. The reason I see projects go wrong is because too many of them start without any kind of agreement of contracts or terms and conditions or anything like that. Whether we go to a JCT form of contract or whether we go to something that's way simpler, perhaps just some heads of terms, then the very nature of putting those heads of terms on a piece of paper or a contract on a piece of paper will bring together both parties. If you're interested in those smaller projects, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to podcast number 9, so 09, where I was talking about contracts for smaller projects. So contrast the way I was talking between the two, but you'll see the common denominator here is that we are aiming to agree and iron out any issues before the project starts, rather than have an issue further on down the line. So I hope this has given you an overview of JCT Contracts. Don't forget that you're welcome to get in touch with me if you want to know more about JCT Contracts. If indeed you think you might need someone to act as your contract administrator, more than happy to talk to you about that as well. So all the best with your projects. I look forward to catching up with you soon.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. Please do like, share and leave a comment where you can. If you need any guidance or advice with anything to do with your refurbishments or conversions, then don't hesitate to reach out. You can book a free call with me by clicking on the link at the top of my website, refurbishmentmastery.com. There's other ways you can contact me in the show notes as well. I look forward to speaking to you again soon.